Hey Mending Men brothers, let me share this quick Mending Men moment with you. Have you ever considered what it takes to be a good father? Over recent years, I've come across more and more men, both Christian and non-Christian, both single and married, who seem to be grappling with this question. Now today I want to put it to you that believing in the message of the gospel best frees you and I to become the best fathers our children need today. The gospel is this beautiful story of our Heavenly Father loving us, His wayward, rebellious, and estranged children. And He loves us so much that He goes to the extent of pursuing us by laying down His life for us through Jesus. And even while we were wayward, while we were estranged, while we were rebellious, while we were running away from Him, He's done this for us. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus tells a beautiful story to help the religious leaders of His day and those who were following Him better understand who we are as sons and who our Heavenly Father is. It's a story of a father and two sons, and both sons seem to be estranged from the father. They both seem to be rebellious and wayward, and in actual fact, really wanting nothing to do with the father. Both sons seem to care more about the father's stuff, more than what they actually care about having a relationship with him. Now, the youngest son, he wants his share of the inheritance, and he actually says to his father, "I wish you were dead." The oldest son, even though he's been faithful in taking care of the father's business, he gets mad at the father because the father has never, according to him, given him any of his stuff. The youngest son then leaves the father's house, and he goes and he squanders all that the father has given him. And the oldest son, he refuses to celebrate with the father and participate in the father's joy because he is bitter. We then see the father firstly welcoming back his estranged, wayward, and rebellious youngest son. When the son comes to his senses and returns, we see the father pursuing the older and embittered son and actually pleads with him to come and participate in the father's joy and to come and celebrate with him. Now you can read about this beautiful story that Jesus tells us in the Gospel of Luke, and it's found in Luke chapter 15. You can read it from verses 1 to 2 and verses 11 to 32. It's the story that's commonly known to us as the parable of the prodigal son. Now, this story that Jesus tells, it beautifully summarizes the gospel, and it has big implications that can help you and I be better fathers today. Now, there are three things that I want us to see here. The first thing that I want us to see is that we are better fathers when we are sons first. Now, you can open your Google Chrome page and you can type how to be a better father, and you will come up with lists upon lists of good advice. And sometimes you'll stumble across advice that says that your ability to father well is connected to the way in which you have been fathered. Now, I suspect that for many of us, this piece of advice may be very discouraging. Many of us did not have the privilege of growing up with a father, or some of us may have had a father who himself did not know how to be a father. The gospel, however, calls you and I into a relationship with our true Father, our Heavenly Father. He loves us so much that He went through great lengths to show us that love. He calls you and I as sons to come into an intimate relationship with Him, despite our brokenness, despite our failings, despite our weaknesses, despite our rebellion, despite our sin. In fact, when we come to Him, we don't first have to get our act together. We can come to Him in our brokenness. We can come to Him in our weakness, in our sinfulness, in our rebellion. We can come to Him, and He will come running to meet us with open arms. Now, the youngest son in the story, he came to his senses in the pig's pen, And he probably didn't have time to clean up, and so went back to the father's house with filthy garments and all. And when he came back to the father's house, he planned to work his way back into his father's heart by being a servant in his father's house first. But upon his return, his father welcomes him back, not as a servant, but as his son. There was no need for him to work his way back into his father's heart. And the same is true for you and I. When we come back to God from a life of running away from Him in sin, He welcomes us back, not as slaves and servants, but He welcomes you and I back as sons. And as you and I realize that we are sons and we live in that reality, we are better able to father our children, because we have the greatest example of fatherhood in our Heavenly Father. Now, there are a long list of implications that we can draw up about fatherhood lessons learned from God, but we won't go into all of them now. But there are two things that I want us to consider from this text that we are engaging with today. The first is that we are better fathers when we forgive and when we practice reconciliation. In the story, we see a radical display of forgiveness and reconciliation by a father who was offended and disrespected greatly. And even though the son left with his father's stuff, not only that, he squandered all of that stuff, and more than that, he technically wished that his father was dead. He had no regard for his father whatsoever. And he comes back to the father's house, and the stench of the sinful life that he led was all around him. And yet we see the father running to meet him as he sees him return. He places a ring on his finger, symbolizing his authority as a son. He puts a cloak on him, and he prepares a feast to celebrate his return. And in a moment, just like that, he is forgiven and he is reconciled with his father. And this is the same forgiveness and reconciliation that you and I are recipients of today. We are sons who now have a responsibility to seek to forgive others and to be reconciled to them. And how much more is that not true for our own children? How has your children been wayward? How has your children been rebellious? How has your children not wanted anything to do with you? Have your children disappointed you? Have they embarrassed you? How have your children offended and disrespected you? As a son who has received what he has not deserved, you and I have the responsibility to bring this beautiful gospel reality into our families and into our societies, and we have the privilege of starting with our own children. Now, your son who is on drugs, your daughter who got pregnant and left your house, your son who is struggling with his identity as a man, your son who has been incarcerated, your daughter who has gotten married and moved on with the life and doesn't really want anything to do with you since. You are the best father to these children when you follow your Heavenly Father's example of lavishly, wastefully forgiving and loving and pursuing reconciliation with your children. The second thing that I want us to see from this text that we are engaging, the story that Jesus tells the religious leaders and his followers, is that we are better fathers when we patiently pursue our children. Now, in the story, it seems like the Heavenly Father patiently waited and longed for the day when his youngest son would return. The text tells us that the father saw his son coming on from afar, and he did what a man in that day would not do. He got up and he ran toward his son. The story also tells us that when the older son became embittered, the father went out to go and plead with him to come in and celebrate with him. Now, our Father has greatly pursued us. He has sent Jesus to die so that we can be reconciled to Him again. In fact, He's been pursuing mankind throughout history. And even so, whilst we kept on running away from Him. Friends, how are you pursuing your children today? How are you relentlessly chasing after them? How are you daily helping them feel the warmth of the love you have for them? If you have very young children, you have the privilege of starting to pursue their little hearts with your love by gently engaging them. And you can do this in a number of ways. You can do it by spending quality time with them. You can do this by playing with them. Why don't you dance with them, laugh with them, sing with them? Why don't you hold them tightly in your arms, look into their eyes deeply, and tell them how much you love them? Why don't you have conversations with your children? Maybe you have teenagers, and I don't know what it is like to have a teenager yet, but maybe pursuing them is getting a little harder to do. But I want to encourage you to still talk with them, still find out what are things that make them feel loved and affirmed. And maybe your child has already gone down a path of bad decision making. Don't let your heart grow cold towards them. Pray for them. Let them know that you love them, that you are there for them whenever they need you. When that call comes in the middle of the night to tell you that your child got into trouble, why don't you get up and run to be there for your child? We grow up in a society that teaches us that we need to have tough love. But I think the best kind of tough love that you can give your child is to love them whilst they really don't want to be loved. To love them whilst they are running away from you. To love them even when they end up in the pig's pen. Friends, there are so many more things that we can learn about being better fathers from the love that we have received from our Heavenly Father. But the most important thing is first that you and I, who are now on the receiving end of our Heavenly Father's love as sons, and that as we experience His love, it should now become our desire to replicate this love in the world, and especially so with our own children in our own families. As you prepare to celebrate Father's Day this month, and as you think about becoming a better father each day, I pray that you will first learn what it means to be God's son, and that would free you to be all that God desires you to be as a father. Happy Father's Day. God bless.